But the British, we love our history and nostalgia. There's a real romanticism about steam trains and luxury travel. They're not known for their ability to make money. They often cost more to operate than it earns. So it has to get its funding from a variety of sources. There's a story there to be told about communities and about economics, about social history, that I think we need to be finding a way to tell in a way that is engaging.
Hello everyone, I am your host Elliot Griffiths. Welcome back to Track Talk Podcast. Today I am joined by Malcolm Holmes, the General Manager for the Great Central Railway. Now Malcolm, it's great to have you here today with me. How have you been so far today? What have you been up to?
I've been very good, thanks. I have had a very chilled day, spending most of it with my two ginger cats who at some point will wander across the shop, I think.
I think the audience will be looking forward to that. Have you got any other pets, dogs, fish?
No, just these two ginger boys. The ginger twins. Fred and George, Harry Potter, the Weasley twins.
I've never been able to get into Harry Potter, you know. It's never gripped me. I'm not a huge child actor fan. Whenever I watch anything of a kid as the main character, it just sort of irritates me for some reason. Besides Home Alone, I do like Home Alone.
Home Alone's good, yeah, Home Alone's good.
Yeah, it's a cracking time. What's your favourite Christmas film whilst we're on it?
Favourite Christmas film is probably Love Actually.
Oh, it's a classic, yeah. That is a classic. I do like Richard Curtis. My favourite, though, is Notting Hill. I'm a big Notting Hill fan.
Good film. That is a good film.
Yeah. Anything with Hugh Grant and sort of floppy hair.
Yeah. People say I sound like Hugh Grant. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, I'll definitely take that. That's a compliment and a half straight for the podcast.
You may not agree, so maybe bollocks, but... Yeah.
I suppose it's probably better to look like him, but you got to take what you can get in this world.
That's true. People say I look like what's his name? That actor with the big ears.
Big ears.
Yeah, actor with the big ears. Although I'll find him. Google actor with big ears. Russell Covey.
Okay. I can't say I know the face off the top of my head, but I'm sure I'll Google afterwards.
I will Google him. Well, I'm not sure this is particularly relevant to the.
No, it's all about the enjoyable conversations. That's what the listenership are here for. But I suppose we probably should move on to the rail side of things since it's a Track Talk podcast. So moving on then, Malcolm, would you like to explain to the audience? I mean, I'm sure everyone listening to this knows who you are, but would you like to explain to them who you are, what you currently do, and then we'll move on to why you're here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Malcolm Holmes, I am currently Executive Director of the West Midlands Rail Executive and Director of Rail for Transport for West Midlands. Probably worth a bit of a quick intro as to who those organisations are. And in typical sort of local government terms, we make it quite complicated. So in the West Midlands, we have the Mayoral Combined Authority of the West Midlands, led by the Mayor Andy Street, and that looks after the metropolitan area of the West Midlands. So it's got a high population density, relatively speaking, but relatively low in geographical terms. And the transport bit of the West Midlands Combined Authority is Transport for West Midlands, the old passenger transport executives that some of your listeners will be familiar with from the past. West Midlands Rail Executive is very strongly related to Transport for West Midlands and West Midlands Combined Authority, but rail doesn't conveniently acknowledge administrative boundaries and goes way beyond them. So what the Rail Executive does is pick up a political geography that matches a logical rail geography. So that includes the surrounding shire and unitary authorities around the West Midlands, so the likes of Herefordshire, Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, Warwickshire, and so on. So that's who I am and the organisation that I lead, and we essentially do three things. First of those is we've had a long-standing relationship with the Department of Transport over the management of rail services in the West Midlands. That was the purpose we came into being, actually, to have greater influence over how our trade services in the region are run. Second thing we do is rail strategy. That's our 10, 20, 30-year look into the future to understand what the rail capacity and trade service needs of the future may be. Now, we've just recently published a new rail investment strategy because so much had changed since the last one, not least COVID, of course, and HS2 timescales moving and so on. And then thirdly, we build stuff as well. And we've got about £210 million programme of capital works, rebuilding railway stations. Perry Barry opened last May before the Commonwealth Games. It's the closest station to the Alexander Stadium, where all the athletics were and opening and closing ceremonies were played out. And we are in the process of rebuilding University Station, which will be opening autumn this year. And then we've got 5 brand new stations that we're building in and around the West Midlands. So that's who we are in a nutshell.
Sounds like you got a lot on your plate then. How were the Commonwealth Games? For another 3 weeks, yeah. So how were the Commonwealth Games? Whilst you're on the topic, that was a bit of a busy period.
Commonwealth Games were amazing, actually. So, yeah, really incredible period. A lot of planning that went into it, both in terms of capital schemes and improvements to the transport network, not just in rail, but across the piece, but also in planning for the train service as well. Coming out of the back of the pandemic, the rail industry was certainly struggling in terms of quantity of train drivers available for work, as well as a reduction in train service that came about during COVID. So there was a lot of planning that went into that, and it was a really strong collaborative effort and a real focus of mine and the organisation over quite a few years now has been about getting the rail industry to collaborate and work together. And the most significant manifestation of that really is the creation of the West Midlands Ground Railway Collaboration, which brings together the 6 train operators that are in the region, Network Rail, with ourselves and other industry partners to try to make things better for passengers. Anyway, through this process, we developed the train service plan for the Commonwealth Games, and it actually went off really well, which was good, despite strikes on one of the days, which was hardly noticed really, and we put alternatives in place. But it was an incredible period being in the West Midlands and something I'm really proud of being involved in. Amazing, really.
No, of course. So obviously with the, with the use of lockdown restrictions as the sort of rail communities, coming back to the rail passage, did you find that with the sort of influx of people that came for the Commonwealth Games, after that, did it sort of subside with passenger numbers, or did it actually sort of increase to a steady level afterwards?
Created a bit of a bounce, I think. Yeah, created a bit of a bounce. And we saw numbers staying up for a while since then. Of course, there's been a lot of industrial action and other factors that have suppressed it. But the draw of the city centre in Birmingham, with the Bull here, of course, and so on, I think led to a real bounce, whether people were going to Commonwealth Games related events or not. It was just an amazing place to be, and that kept on for a bit after the Games had finished.
No, fantastic. No, it did look very nice, to be fair. I've always wanted to go to a little athletics event like that. I've never got a chance to go. But moving on from the fun games, with your role now, obviously, that you've done a lot of good experience, working with things like the Commonwealth Games and doing a lot of other fun things, I imagine. But obviously, you are coming to an end of that role now, and you've recently just accepted a position at Heritage Railway. Would you like to explain what it is you're going to be moving on to?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, a bit of a radical shift, actually. And there is a link back to what we've just been talking about with the Commonwealth Games, because one of the things I was doing during the Commonwealth Games was getting very involved in a way that I don't normally in this job, in day-to-day operational activity, and was really enjoying being close to customers and close to the transport operation. It was a hugely enjoyable period. And in part, that's what's led me to go for the job that I'm soon to begin. So the Great Central Railway is an 8.5 mile steam railway in Leicestershire. It's been going now and operating passenger services for about 50 years in its heritage guise. And the job of general manager is working with the board of directors for the railway, running the day-to-day operation for the railway. So very much an operational leadership role as opposed to the one that I do now, which is more strategic. So quite a significant shift. I've been a volunteer in the railway for probably about 28 years now. I know I don't look old enough, but there we are. It was not an expected career choice for me, but when the vacancy arose for the post of general manager, I thought I'd give it a go. Friends of mine said to me, well, you can't accept a job you haven't been offered, so what harm is there in going for it? And here I am. So in 3 weeks' time, take up take up a new role, which should be a very different and interesting leadership challenge, I think.
Oh, I can imagine. So did you just say that you've been sort of volunteering and working there alongside this for the last 23 years, was it?
28 years, yeah.
28 years, sorry.
18, yeah.
So with that sort of role that you had beforehand, then what were you doing for that time period at the railway?
On the Heritage Railway. It was, well, two kind of phases of it, really. In my early years, I was involved in the stations and in station management. And we've got on the railway 4 stations, and some of those are really quite historic. One of them I was senior station master for quite a few years, is a gaslit station restored to an Edwardian, or how it may well have been in the Edwardian period, which was it's a really beautiful station, worth a visit. Rothy Station, that's called. So that was what I did back then. And then when I returned, I had a period of time away from it, working in London. And then when I returned a few years later, I then went back into operational roles. So working on diesel locomotives as was known as the second man, equivalent to a fireman, really. You'd have on a steam locomotive and then become a driver and a shunter, the person that couples locomotives to trains and so on, and guard, or even the green flag. So, yeah, a variety of operational roles.
Oh, brilliant. And did you say you started at 18?
18 on that railway, yeah.
Oh, wow. So have you always been a train enthusiast, and it's not something you sort of fell into?
No, it's always been an interest of mine, yeah, since I was a kid.
Right. Were you much of a train spotter then? Does it run in the family? Was your dad involved with it as well?
I'm not a bit into that. Yeah, I think my dad got me into it, actually, all those years ago. That and buses, and I own 2 Heritage buses, actually, as well.
You own them?
I own 2 Heritage buses, yeah.
How does one go about owning a Heritage bus?
Well, there's an interesting topic. So the first one came about whilst I was on holiday with a friend of mine in Lanzarote, and it was a bit of a damp afternoon. So we went to an Irish bar for a few beers, as you do. And a mate of mine, he wanted to buy an MG, so we spent about 3 hours scrolling through eBay and procrastinating. And then I jokingly said, "Forget that, you don't want an MG. Why don't we get a bus? We need to buy a bus." So we got another beer and started then looking at buses on eBay, and within an hour and a half we owned one. And neither of us could drive the bus, and it was on the Isle of Wight. So the first thing I had to do, first time I was driving a bus, was to drive the bloody thing onto a ferry. So that was interesting. So that was my first bus that I co-owned with a friend of mine, and then the other one has a nostalgic appeal. I used to go to school on these buses when I was a kid and growing up in Somerset, so I was able to get one of those during lockdown in 2020, which is amazing. So I love that. Yeah, it's good fun.
That's pretty
random
cool.
and expensive hobby. Sorry.
I can imagine. Are they double deckers? What size are you saying? One's
double decker, the other one's single.
Yeah. Oh wow! Do you have to get a special license to drive that, or does that all fall under the just a standard?
It's all quite complicated, but the short answer is yes. If you want to carry passengers on it, you need to have a PCV, passenger carrying vehicle license. There are kind of variations to that depending on age and how long you've been driving and so on, how many people are on. But
yeah, of course. Do you carry passengers? Do you ever, on the weekend? Do you ever just get a little side hustle?
Yeah. If you want to come out for a ride one day, I'll take you for a ride on the bus. Yeah, we do heritage vehicle events, bus events, that sort of thing. It's just like owning a classic car, to be honest. It's just more difficult to park.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good point. Where do you park it? Is it outside the front garden or something?
I wish. I'd love that. One's on a farm somewhere in Warwickshire, and then the other one's at a bus depot in Birmingham, actually.
Right, okay. Well, moving on from the buses, then obviously this is track talk. Do you own any trains?
No, I don't. Actually.
I suppose there's probably a lot.
I own a bit expensive. Of one, but not a whole one.
A bit. How big's the bit? We're talking a little seating area.
No, yeah, that'll do. Something that doesn't break, hopefully.
You just got your name inscribed into the bench. But then, so moving back onto the Heritage Railways. Now, obviously, you and I had met about 2 weeks previously, I think, to recording this podcast. We met at a Trans-City Rail event for the Midlands. And when you started telling me about your new role, I obviously, doing my job, I know a little bit about Heritage Railways, but not a whole lot. And I started looking into it a little bit. I found it quite interesting. And I didn't realise how many there were. So according to my notes, I could be a bit off, but apparently there's 182 Heritage Rail sites across the UK.
I'm not going to contradict you on that. I'll take you as having done your research on that. That sounds about right.
Well, yeah. I'm hoping I'm right with that. Now, again, I didn't really realise the prominence of them that still exists within the UK. Now, as someone that obviously has an avid interest in it, and you're moving on to work full time within those sites, what is it that makes Heritage Rail so special, and what is it that encapsulates British culture within it?
That's a very good question. I think there's a combination of things, really, and it depends on the market actually as well. So it does a number of things for different segments of the markets that we serve. But the British, we love our history and nostalgia, and in our recent memory, as in either our own memory or the memory of our parents or grandparents, there's a real romanticism about railways, steam trains and luxury travel, dining on trains and that sort of thing, or people that desired to drive a steam locomotive when they were a child or whatever, an aspiration I had when I was a kid. There's a real fascination, I think, with our relatively recent history in the UK. And when I say relatively recent, I mean sort of the last 100 years or so. So I think that creates a real popularity around steam heritage railways. And there's also a scenery thing about it as well. And a number of the 182 or however many it was heritage railways you just mentioned pass through some pretty beautiful parts of the country. You know, there's railways like the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which as the title suggests, passes through some beautiful countryside in North Yorkshire. The West Somerset Railway goes along the coast, on the north coast of Somerset. And the Great Central Railway, we go through some pretty pleasant Leicestershire countryside, including passing over a reservoir, which is really beautiful. So I think there's an element of seeing the country, some of the beautiful elements of our country on heritage railways. And then the other obvious market is the enthusiast market, people that want to travel behind particular locomotives or enjoy travelling on trains for travelling on train's sake, and that's quite a significant size of market. A market that's changing over time, I think, as memory kind of shifts for the trains that people can remember as a kid, as the generations move on. But nevertheless, people don't lose that yearning, or a certain section of the population don't lose that yearning to go and enjoy it. I think you're rapidly going to be counting yourself amongst that number as well, Elliot.
I can't lie. I'm actually kind of wanting to go on one now. I must admit, I kind of want to take a little bit of time off work and have a little jolly. Sounds quite good. So, I might have to hit you up on that then. So, like with the holiday goers, then obviously, are there any sort of overnight stays, or is it like a Caledonian sleeper for heritage maybe, or are they sort of condensed into shorter lines, so there's not really the need for that?
Yeah, it's not normally an overnight thing on heritage railways, although people will make a weekend of it, or they will feature in a longer holiday. Leicestershire is not a particularly big holiday destination. You don't think of going on holiday ordinarily to Leicestershire, although there's quite a lot of day tripping, weekends away, that sort of thing. But there are railways, the North Norfolk Railway in Sheringham, for example, the two that I mentioned previously, the North Yorkshire Moors and West Somerset Railway, very much in holiday destinations, and there are many more of those where they do provide, a core feature of the appeal of an area of holiday destination. But it's big business for us for the Great Central Railway in terms of the tourist market.
No, definitely. Well, speaking of the business side of things, then, when it comes to these sorts of rail systems, what's the, how does it get funded? Is it done like via financial backers? Is it done by the ticket sales? Who controls the railways, if that makes sense?
That makes absolute sense. So it varies between railways, and it rather depends on the features of the railway and the market it's serving, and so on. They're not known for their ability to make money. They often, certainly the case of the Great Central Railways, it costs more to operate than at least currently it earns. So it has to get its funding from a variety of sources. Clearly, passenger fares, whether that's through just people turning up on the day and buying a ticket, or whether it's a dining train, or people paying to drive a locomotive on one of our trains, and we do packages for that, which is really good income. Or whether it's testing work, we hire out a railway firm. Testing of rail-borne equipment and so on. That all provides income to the railway. There are sometimes rich backers, people who are really passionate about the railways with money, who will pump money into the railway, often for specific projects. And then there are charitable support trusts or organisations that are often related to heritage railways that provide financial support, again either for specific schemes or sometimes just to help manage the cash flow and so on, particularly during times that are difficult and the economic climate at the moment, but for heritage railways or any tourist attraction, with the cost of living crisis and people feeling less money in their pockets, it's making it very difficult for facilities such as organisations such as ours. That's very much discretionary spend.
No, of course. It sounds like it must have been a tough time for those sorts of organisations, especially when it came to the recent years for the pandemic restrictions. How tough was that for for the Great Central Railway?
Actually, it was clearly difficult because we weren't running any trains, but because of the government support, we got through it okay, actually, through furlough and through grants to businesses. We managed to get through it okay. The challenge now is actually with the fallout from the pandemic, and the current economic situation, impact of Brexit and so on, which is reducing the amount of money that people have got in their pockets and making trading conditions very difficult. The war in Ukraine has made things difficult. Energy prices are affecting all of us. They've quadrupled for us over the course of the last 18 months. And the cost of coal, which normally doesn't bother too many people these days, but for us, of course, it's a vital commodity if you're running steam locomotives in Britain. The cost of coal's gone up from something like £260 a tonne a year ago to £460 a tonne today. So, that difference can tip the scales, particularly when combined with the utilities increase, to mean that a train that previously was making a contribution in terms of train fares is now running at a loss. It can make a real difference. So it's tough times out there. I'm certain it'll get better. Just not quite sure when that will be. And we just got to protect ourselves in the meantime.
Well, it sounds like in your new role you're going to have a hell of a job to do. It sounds going to be a bit tough, but probably rewarding, I imagine.
Yeah, certainly. And from a personal development perspective, running a P&L in this way is not something I've had to do before. So it'll be a really interesting experience for me, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to obviously test all your skills in the rail sector, I suppose. Now, obviously, moving into this new role, do you have any visions for where you want to take it? Is there anything in mind? Maybe it's something you want to implement, or maybe a different strategy of how to attract more people towards using heritage rail for their little leisure trips?
I've got quite a few ideas of where I'd like to take things on the railway. I'm taking I haven't started the job yet, and I'm taking an approach whereby I spend despite the fact I've been on the railway for 28 years, that I'm going to take some time, normally in 100 days, 3 months, to understand and learn about the business, and then after that develop a strategy to drive us forward from there. So not being too specific yet about where I'm going to head with it, but suffice to say, I think there are some areas where we really do need to focus as an industry as much as the Great Central Railway specifically. And a couple of examples of that are, one is in the 2020s, is just going for steam train rides sufficient? So what should a steam heritage railway be doing in the 2020s to attract visitors? Are we educating people sufficiently? Are we entertaining them sufficiently? There's a huge numbers of stories, narratives that you can tell around railways, and we're not always that good at telling them. It's just a train ride. Yet railways were absolutely fundamental to the Industrial Revolution. They had a massive impact on people's lives wherever they went. Towns and cities grew up around railways through the carriage of goods and the carriage of people. So there's a story there to be told about communities and about economics, about social history, that I think we need to be finding a way to tell in a way that is engaging and going to interest people. I think then more specifically, a second area of focus is around environmental impact. And I mentioned a little while ago about the use of coal. And we've always accepted on running a heritage railway that you need coal. But as we focus on decarbonisation as a society, and rightly so, in reducing the impacts of climate change, we need at the very least to be interpreting our use of what is probably the worst type of fossil fuel in coal, both interpreting the impact of that we're currently burning, and how we net off that against our other activities, if that's possible, but also explaining how coal contributed to the Industrial Revolution, and how it's right that its use has reduced so significantly today. There's an education piece there, I think, that we've got an obligation to play a part in. So there's a couple of themes there. One is what should heritage railway be for its visitors in the 2020s? And then secondly, how do we interpret the use of a fuel like coal? Again, I think there's an education piece to do that.
Are there any sort of alternative fuels that can be used, or is it mainly the sort of like you want to keep coal in that it is the heritage aspect and that is what it used to be, or are there trials for any other alternatives at the moment?
There are actually, yeah. I was reading an interesting article about them recently, and there are various different solutions from using crushed olive stones through to coal dust mixed with other stuff to provide briquettes that are being trialled in heritage steam locomotives, recognising that both the supply of coal as well as its environmental impact in the longer term means that alternatives need to be considered. So yeah, there is active work going on in that space.
Okay, no, that's good. I'm sure the environmentalists will be happy to hear. So just moving on a little bit then, you're talking a bit about how we can encourage people to sort of, use them, how we can encourage to change the view around heritage rail, I suppose. What would you say is the main obstacle that exists within heritage rail for the exposure? Because obviously, a man like myself knows a little bit about it, then I speak to a man like you, and then I end up looking a bit more into it, and now we're having this conversation. Now my interest is piqued, and I probably would quite like to go on one, but for the people that don't work within rail, or the younger generations that aren't particularly interested in that, how can we get that message out there besides through podcasts like this, or that kind of coverage? Is there anything more we can be doing?
Well, podcasts like this are obviously the way to go. There are, I think there's a whole variety of different areas where we need to focus on that. It's often said to me, or I pick up anecdotal stories of people who live within a mile of our base in Loughborough, our main station in Loughborough, that don't know there's a heritage railway there, or have either an outdated or don't fully understand the scale of our operations, so therefore we're clearly doing something with getting the messaging out there about what it is that we do. I think that for me that starts very much in how we engage with the education system. As I've mentioned previously, the railways have got one hell of a story to tell, actually, in terms of its social and economic impact on our nation, and indeed on our local communities. And there's a lot of alignment between what the stories that we can tell and the national curriculum. And I think there's a role for us to play in education, so at a young age people are understanding what's going on in one element of their local community. So I think that's very much a part of it. I think there's also a need for us to be better at working outwards. We tend to be quite inward facing as an organisation, barring a bit of marketing here and there, and engage more with businesses, with community groups, as well as doing, joking aside, podcasts like this and doing bits in local newspapers, websites, and so on, just to get the word out and get people talking about the railway and what it is that we do. There's huge interest there, as you are a shining example of it. So a convert already.
There we go.
But we need to get out there and have those conversations.
No, definitely. Well, I'm definitely now going to be a martyr for the cause. I'll be championing it as far as I can through all the socials or the RTM platform. I'm pretty sure I've done a few pieces actually about some heritage railway testing sites, because I think there was one in Kent where you said earlier about like the tracks being used to like test other things. I'm pretty sure I definitely did something around that. And that, again, that's another thing I wouldn't really think about when it comes to like track testing or anything along those lines. You have a whole route there that isn't going to actually disrupt any passenger journeys, are they? If it's if that's how they want to be used. So I suppose there's definitely uses for them in the modern world, definitely.
On our railway, we're particularly one thing I've explained about our railways. In fact, pretty much every other heritage railway in the UK is a kind of branch line arrangement, single track, whereas we uniquely are a double track mainline railway. So the railway was originally built as an extension of what was called the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincoln Railway. It's its London extension. And it was the last main line to be built in Britain before HS1. And it took a pretty direct route through the middle of Britain. Hence Great Central Railway is the name, I guess, through to Marylebone. So it was built as a mainline railway and then closed in the 1960s as part of the Beeching Cuts. But that means that we've got a pretty good quality double track mainline railway, and we do operate most of it, 6 miles of it, as double track. So we can actually offer quite high speed testing in a way that most other railways can't, and run up to speeds of 75 miles an hour on test with not with passengers on, but with test work. So it's quite a flexible and dynamic testing proposition actually, that I'm keen commercially to make more use of, because going back to a conversation earlier about how we how to make expensive heritage railways wash their face, getting testing work when we haven't got a normal passenger trains running is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, of course. Speaking a little bit more then about the money, one thing I did want to bring up as well is obviously a lot of trains for passenger services, a lot of operators, they sort of rent their rolling stock, don't they? They're not going out and buying it directly. Now, with the heritage side, I did want to sort of touch upon, do you own those trains, or are they rented from someone still? Or how does that go about?
Ooh, very complex. So,
okay.
And there's no short answer to it really. So you're absolutely right. So in most of the National Rail network, vast majority, the train operator will lease the rolling stock, locomotives and rolling stock from a leasing company, a financing company. It's very different in heritage rail though, and doesn't generally work in that way. And simplistically speaking, it's kind of the rolling stock is owned in one of two ways. It's either owned directly by the railway, which we do for some bits, or one of the charitable support organisations will own it, and one of our charitable support organisations owns a couple of locomotives, for example. Or rolling stock and locomotives are owned by private individuals or groups. And on the Great Central Railway, there are very many groups of peoples or individuals who own pieces of rolling stock that we operate and maintain. So yeah, a whole variety of different owners for our locos and rolling stock.
Oh, okay. In my head, it was just some sort of billionaire just sat there, a big rail enthusiast, just on a stockpile of them, like an old garage or something.
Yeah, there are people in the industry who have earned a great deal of money and then enjoy their hobby by owning lots of rolling stock. So there are people who do that.
That makes no sense. Why wouldn't you?
Well, exactly. It's like me owning buses.
Exactly. I do really like that.
I'm not rich enough to own trains.
Well, yet. Give it some time. Wait till that. Once this podcast hits, the heritage is going to boom. Don't you worry. Absolutely. The tickets will be flying off the shelves.
Looking forward to it.
Once they hear that Elliot Griffiths endorses it, it's a big name. All right, well, Malcolm, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Not wanting to cut you off too quickly now, so I will just say we are probably going to wrap up here. But if there's anything we've not touched upon that you do want to address, I do want to give you a bit of time at the end here. The floor is yours. Anything you want to get off your chest or have a moan about, whatever it could be.
No, I think I've covered everything. And if I say any more now, that doesn't leave an opportunity then for a follow-up in the series around heritage railways, and follow my career in the new job in a regular podcast, every few months. So I can't give you everything today.
If you want a recurring co-host role, Malcolm, we can talk. We'll check the viewing figures after this, and then I'll make you an offer.
You've got a deal.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Malcolm. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure that, I hope the listeners will too. But yeah, thank you very much. And this is Elliot Griffiths signing off. Thank you for listening, everyone.